responding to the proceedings. And finally, there will be a vote of thanks by the supervisor, Dr. Pratibha. So over to Nisha.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Sharif sir. Good morning, Pradima teacher, Narayan sir. Um, Pratibha, no, I mean, Aparna has got a very interesting thesis. The topic is Woman Becoming a Subject, an inquiry on selected texts based on conceptual categories of Ellen Badu. She has looked into, I think, one writer, um, one Chinese American writer, Maxine Hong Kingston's A Woman Warrior, a memoir of a girlhood among ghosts. And she has also looked into a real life event, uh, which is very unusual. You know, you don't have a book being looked into as and real life resistance as a site of event and subjectivization. That is the title of chapter 5, a case study of Pombulai Orumai and similar struggles in Kerala. So you have two different texts, one real textbook and the other an event, a case study of the workers' agitation which took place in the tea estate of Munnar in around 2015. You have looking into this real life event and how the woman subject comes into play. Let's hear from the horse's mouth. Over to you, Aparna. All of us are waiting for you to defend your thesis.
Thank you,
All
ma'am.
the best.
Thank you. Shall I present it, ma'am?
Yeah.
Okay. So the title of my thesis is Woman Becoming a Subject, an inquiry on selected texts based on the conceptual categories of Ellen Badu. This thesis examines the intricacies regarding the notion of subjectivity and attempts to trace the process of subjectivity, female subjectivity, in two different contexts. Identifying three major phases of women becoming is also attempted in the thesis. The two texts analyzed here are The Woman Warrior, Memoirs of a Childhood Among Ghosts, written by the Chinese American immigrant Maxine Hong Kingston, and the Mona Tea Estate protest, widely known as the Pumbulai Orumai protest. The first one is a memoir, and the other is a real life event that occurred in Kerala. While the former is a personal narrative, the latter is a social event. The memoir presents before us a series of events in the writer's growing up stage which shaped her thoughts and influenced her politics. Mona protest led by Pombulai Urmai collector was a struggle for basic human rights, better living conditions, and decent wages. The memoir narrates mostly an unexpected series of events in the author's personal life, which helped her evolve as the woman that she is. The Protestant Mona was a collective event organized mainly by a female collective, and this event and its consequences changed the participants' perception of the world in various ways. Also, the world's perception of the participants too was changed drastically as a result of this collective resistance. The settings of the memoir changes from China to America and from America to China again, and but the protest occurred in a small state in India. Despite these apparent differences, there are some similarities in the female experiences of both texts. The thesis analyzes how the women in these texts became subjects who recognized the difference between their earlier identity as socially constructed females and their transformed selves as political subjects with independent choices. A theory of subjectivity is that which analyzes the individual's perception of the world in which they live and its reality. Theory places the individual in a political and social context. Any theory of subjectivity analyzes the conditions which construct the reality of an individual. The process of subjectivity, Susan's statement says, consists of the emergence of the individual, his or her construction of identity, its representation in dialogues and narratives, and its corporal register. A theory of subjectivity is necessary to develop a critical insight into the workings of social and political forces in creating the subject. It also helps to resist subordination and to promote self-transforming strategies and for a larger political visibility. A theoretical framework is also needed to place specific problems in wider social context. Um, this benefits women in recognizing the general nature of their physical, moral, and psychological struggles. Also, the theoretical and academic focus on subjectivity stimulates insights into the epistemological self envisioned by the individual to be more organized and astute in confrontations with the world. These studies also inform a woman on the truth and falsity of the historical and social stereotyping of women. Mm, all the efforts towards a theory of female subjectivity are the efforts of women to reconstruct or construct their reality from their own perspective. Um, the thesis invokes the French philosopher Alain Badiou in its attempt to trace the process of female subjectivity, since Badiou's theory of the subject helps explain the transformation of women from being to becoming better than maybe any available theoretical framework. The purpose of the study is to establish new ways of looking at a feminist theory. Badiou's theory of the subject is not based on gender differences or gender binaries and power hierarchies. It's a kind of egalitarian concept, egalitarian in its conception, and it's more humanitarian since the subject is evaluated on the basis of actions rather than other achievements and power hierarchies. The theory of Alain Badiou is a militant one that distrusts language itself, and the role of language in creating subjects is also critically investigated by Badiou in his works. Badiou in this theory of the subject explains how an individual or any body is transformed into a subject through a process consisting of subjectivation and subjective process. He talks about this as a process which includes four temporalities: anxiety, courage, justice, and superego. It is an unexpected event that makes a body a subject. Badiou's theoretical formulations are all based on this unprecedented and uncertain event. Becoming is a process of dissolving the system, disrupting it, or even destroying it. Badiou's subject causes an interruption and the repetition of the androcentric system of discriminating based on gender and sexuality, and the distraction of the lack which is imposed on women. It is the anxiety regarding this imposed lack, which forces the destruction. The Bedouin event disqualifies the old truth instead of destructing or destroying it. The recognition of the old truth is that recognition of the old truth as something which is not qualified to be a truth, and the courage to create a new truth characterize the process of subjectivity. The theory is relevant to male subjectivity because as the consenting participants in the dominant patriarchy, the male members are stuck with the burden of perpetuating the system by blind repetition of the existing patterns. This hinders their creativity and prevents them from becoming. The thesis begins with a study of various theories of subjectivity. The word subject has undergone changes in meaning over the years. Once the subject was passive and its status was preordained, the subject submitted itself to the inevitable, and the object had a more radical disposition at one point in time. The present Nowadays, the subject and philosophy is independent and active. In the case of women, once it denoted the submission of women, and now it refers to the exploration of one's unique self, free from personal prejudices and social constraints. The term subjectivity here also refers to women's positionality, insights into internal and external reality, and the efforts of a woman to place her political self in the changing scenarios of life. It is a need for representation too. Butler says that within the feminist political practice, a radical rethinking of the ontological construction of identity appears to be necessary to formulate representational politics that might revive feminism on other grounds. Similarly, Luz Irigaray is unhappy with how male theorists do not detach sexuality from subjectivity. Monique Wittig even wants to replace the term feminine with lesbian, or replace the term woman with lesbian. She prefers to define the subject not as a social class but as an individual. All these views can be incorporated into a theory of female subjectivity if Badiou's concept of subjectivity is chosen as a foundation or a framework of it. While earlier theories of subjectivity focused on agency and autonomy, the later theories reconstructed the very concept of the subject. And the most recent theories treat the subject as a social and a political construct. From theorizing care, ethics, sexuality, gender, and body, women have significantly changed their attention to strategic thinking and happiness projects. Transformation methodologies, happiness hypotheses, and political manifestos might gradually replace the theories of women's objectivity in the coming ages, since they motivate and inspire women into participating more in a social life. Many thinkers and philosophers link a definite and general truth to women's identity or agency. This happens because it is difficult to form a theoretical framework for women's experiences without generalization of some kind. In Badiou, this task becomes easier because instead of generalizations based on a particular trait, the truth in Badiou can be perceived as the same as the way a person chooses to live his or her life. A woman becomes a subject when she realizes her true self, recognizes her role on this earth, and is aware of her potential, aware of the potential of her agency, and the potential to change the system. The truth is more specific and personal in nature, but at the same time, the process of this truth has common features with the truth of other women. In Badiou, truth is a process in the real, and the event is a supplement to affirm the newness of this truth. The truth is new and not new simultaneously in each woman's life. Um, so Badiou's theory does not deny or disregard gender also. The theory endeavors to liberate subjects from the restricting forces of gender, time, and space, which are also the conditions for constructing the male-female binary, and by stereotyping the body and the language. Instead, Badiou's theory links subjects only to events and material responses of the individuals to these events. While this theory makes all the efforts to incorporate biological gender attributes, it rejects the hegemonic social constructions of gender, which were naturalized as common gender behavior. These hegemonic constructs of gender are gradually recognized, avoided, and replaced by women in the process of becoming a subject. The search for identity here is a process of finding the truth pertaining to each individual, and also the process of the transformation from being to becoming. It does not presuppose gender as a prerequisite in the truth procedure. Mm, and then Linda Alcoff says gender is not natural, biological, universal, historical, or essential, but it is relevant because we can take gender as a position from which to act politically. In a post-truth world where previous gender equations change fast, we can also take gender as a position that should be assigned less significance so that the political actions are taken based on individual preferences or subjectivity rather than gender differences. Alcoff asserts that the very subjectivity and the very identity of women are constituted by women's position. In the background of reduced theory, subjectivity can be otherwise named as a constructed positionality. The individual's construction of her political position through recognition of the eventual truth and by acting in fidelity to it. Excuse me. Um, this actually rejects the idea of existing identity traits as unconsciously affecting one's perspective and instead poses one's potential to construct identity traits that can help a body in becoming a political body with self-constructed and self-conscious positionalities. Post-structuralism also did not liquidate the subject, but rather rehabilitated it. It also decentered and repositioned it in all its historical and cultural complexity. In most of the female subjectivity theories, gender is a political position from which the individual acts. This thesis attempts to rethink subjectivity theories without imagining gender as a political position on which identity is built. In Bethio, subjectivity is related only to an event and its truth. An individual becomes the subject when he or she acts in fidelity to the truth which emerges as a result of an event. Subjectivity here implies one's ontological status with respect to positionality and eventual truths. The subject revolves around truth and exists in response to, exists in relation to, and its response to it. The being of the subject is focused on the recognition of this truth, and the becoming lies in showing fidelity to it. The subject in Bhakti does not submit itself to anybody, but only reinvents one's political self in order to be a faithful subject. Therefore, the subject is liberated from history, state, and its institutions, and even from anxieties about the future in a way. This constructs the subject as an exclusive identity or entity founded on the individual's response to events in his life. Here, subjectivity is an unending, creative, social, political, historical, and materialistic process. The preface of the thesis states the objectives and methodology of the thesis and provides an idea of the structure of the thesis. The first chapter of the thesis serves as an introduction to the idea of subjectivity. The theory of subjectivity as proposed by Alain Badiou and his relevance in the present study is also mentioned here. The second chapter, titled Tracing Conventions, a focus on the subject in male theoretical formulations, reviews most of the major ideas about subjectivity proposed by eminent male thinkers and philosophers. This throws light on how the notion of subjectivity is proposed and celebrated by male thinkers and philosophers. It begins with Aristotle and proceeds to Descartes, Leibniz, Rousseau, Fichet, Schopenhauer, Hegel, Nietzsche, Freud, Heidegger, Lacan, Althusser, Sartre, Foucault, Deleuze, and Guattari. The third chapter, exploring female subjectivity, the vast possibility of dynamics of subjectivity and women becoming, deals with diverse notions of subjectivity put forward by women thinkers, feminists, womanists, and female philosophers from different parts of the world. This chapter also focuses on the difference between male and female perceptions of self, subject, and subjectivity um, at different points in time. It tries to understand various perspectives on the deeply rooted issues which prevent women from um, achieving their best in their spaces, in their domestic work and social spaces. In this chapter, the efforts of modern women thinkers to retrieve the inspiring lives of women in the past are also mentioned. The goal of these efforts is to bring to light the misrepresentation of women to make the invisible visible. The fourth chapter, being, belonging, and becoming, the emerging Bedouin subject in Kingston's The Woman Warrior, the memoir of the renowned Chinese American author Maxine Hong Kingston is thoroughly interrogated to find out the patterns of women's subjectivity, keeping with these conceptual categories in the background as a framework. Mm. Kingston defies the genres of autobiography in her memoir, The Woman Warrior: Memoirs of a Girlhood Among Ghosts. The Woman Warrior is known as an autobiographical fiction, um, or a fictional autobiography also, than a memoir due to its engagement with talk stories and its juxtaposition of fiction and non-fiction to represent her life as a lower class Chinese American immigrant woman. In her memoir, Kingston's detachment with events and places is notably unconventional. All the chapter titles in the memoir are fictional or mythical, and the first chapter of about her aunt, no name woman, and the second chapter about the mythical Famalan are juxtaposed in the memoir. Similarly, her memoir progresses through episodes from other people's lives as much as hers. The episodes about her mother, Brave Orchid, are the ones that make for the most compelling reading in the whole memoir. Instead of narrating the events and her experiences in life directly, Kingston portrays a picture of a girl growing among talk stories in a strange country that becomes her country later in life. Kingston shows the readers how she learned to construct her truths, her reality, and identity through her experiences and her observations. In the memoir, after the initial confusion, she becomes free from the anxieties regarding the binaries, true, false, right, wrong, truth, fiction, self, other, etc. This is her attempt in the memoir to capture the truth as she perceives it, uncorrupted by outside influences. In the memoir, she starts with the talk stories she heard from her mother, Brave Orchid, and moves on to her own talk stories. The real is imagined by her, or rather, what she imagines is the real for her as she matures. Kingston reclaims her no name aunt and other female victims of discrimination and injustice through her talk stories. This shapes her identity as a female writer and a Chinese immigrant as well. Kingston's strange illness, which actually confined to her bed for almost a year, and her problems with the unsaid words. If she says something, if she doesn't say something which she feels, then she feels that her throat is that there is a burning sensation in her throat. So all these unsaid words burning her throat, if they're not given voice, are all imaginative renderings of her of the truth of her life. The only thing is that they are not represented explicitly. The narrator is talking about places she has never been to, like Los Angeles in China, and things she had never seen, like her mother's medical school experiences and exorcisms in this memoir. Uh, in an autobiography, these are not expected. But Kingston's reality consists of these imaginary experiences as well. As far as she is honest with the truths in her life, and as long as she chooses to believe in them, they play a great role in defining her and shaping herself. Kingston's approach to the um, plurality of truths, her technique of defying the genre of autobiography, her retelling of history through fiction and myths, and her discussions on language, silence, and speech as defining factors of an individual's existence are the major reasons behind the selection of this memoir as a work to be studied as a part of this thesis. This work provides an insight into the lives of individual women who are very different from each other in terms of thoughts and actions. Bediou, in his theory of the subject, identifies three kinds of subjects. The faithful subject in Bediou is the one who acts in fidelity to truth of an event. The reactive subject resists this truth, and an obscure subject is unsure of it or uncertain of the truth. Among the many women described in the memoir, Brave Orchid, Kingston, and Moon Orchid are representatives of the three subject variants. Brave Orchid represents the faithful subject, Moon Orchid the reactive subject, and Kingston the obscure subject. The fifth chapter, Real Life Resistance as a Site of Event and Subjectivization, a case study of Kublai Urmai and similar struggles in Kerala, is an examination of workers' agitation that happened in the tea estates of Munnar in April 2015. It was a strike that lasted almost a month. It began as a collective movement of women who demanded better wages, better living conditions, and an increase in bonus. The strike was not a huge success, though it changed the lives of many women who participated in it. The women collective faced many challenges and were dissolved soon after the strike. Later, a group of women started working as a part of this collective under the same title. One can say that the women centered protests began under contemporary context under the influence of C.K. Janu's Mutanga strike for the tribal people's right to land and Mailama strike against the Coca-Cola water exploitation in Palakkad. Kerala's contemporary scenario is very much indebted to various women movements that try to make changes in people's approach towards gender representations and stereotyping. This thesis analyzes the absence of many of these women and the female collectives in public spaces after the success of these movements. The absence is mainly caused by women's lack of political education and training, historical invisibility, and lack of access to social spaces, which is sometimes manipulated as well. In the Mona tea estate strike, the gendered representations were constructed by media and propagated them by naming the struggle itself, Pomlai Urmai. It was a name actually given by the media. Later, the women who led the movement were accused of immoral behavior, and the political and media interventions changed the focus of the people from the real issues at stake to less important matters. The company offered a salary hike in its discussion with the political and labor union leaders and managed to suppress the strike, but changed the lives of the women who participated in it, who led the protest in a very substantial way. Gaumati, one of the leaders of the striking women, described how she became a very different person after the strike. Their act of protest caused a rupture in the existing system, and Gaumati recognized her truth and showed fidelity to it. This truth made holes in the already existing knowledge system. The whole process of agitation from the beginning till the compromise with the management and the government about the wages as part of the formal procedure of the process of subjectivity. Gamadi emerges from this process with new knowledge about her subjective position and a subjective position with regard to this particular event and its truth. The event here can be the occasion when the Kannan management reduced their bonus from 20 percentage to 10 percentage. This triggers thoughts of injustice and force the women to take action. The body here is not a single person, but a consortium of women who worked in the tea estates. They became Bedouin subjects when the effects of their strike changed their very being. They transformed from ordinary beings to political subjects who struggled for a logical necessity and effected a change at least in the minds of people who participated and the people who watched them fight for their rights. This event, which transformed them, is not an extraordinary one, but something which all of them or all of us encountered at different points in time, different points in their life. But their fidelity or faithfulness, or rather commitment to the truth of the event, made them superior beings and subjectivated them. The most significant part of the subjectivity discussed here is that anybody can be a subject despite gender, caste, class, ethnic, or political concerns, if she or he is faithful to their truth. This egalitarian notion is foundational to the women becoming in the specific patriarchal capitalist context discussed in this chapter. A subject is formed as a part of an infinite process of subjectivation and subjective process, and this subjectivity is only the result of an individual's or a body's response to the events in his or her life. In the sixth chapter, titled Reconceptualizing Female Subjectivity, a proposal for an alternative methodology is an attempt to coordinate the various concepts of female subjectivity discussed in all the other chapters to better comprehend the different methodologies of approaching female subjectivity. It traces the three major phases of female subjectivity based on Bidhu's theory of subjectivity and alternate methodology is attempted. So it recognizes the limitations of Bidhu's theory in tracing female subjectivity also. The first limitation is regarding the event. Instead of a specific event is mentioned by Bidhu, female subjectivity might depend itself on a series of events. The second limitation is related to the word fidelity, as Bidhu uses it in his theory of the subject. The fidelity in female subjectivity might be again determined by a series of events in a woman's past, which is very context based. The third limitation is that his theory focuses on the present only without much attention to the events in the past. Hence, there can be a pre-subjectivity phase in the case of women subjects, which acts as a foundation to her responses to chance events in the future. This chapter also identifies the various stages which are part of these three major phases in female subjectivity. These observations are based on the analysis of the memoir of Kingston, the Pombalai strike, media reports on other women collectors, uprisings and strikes, interviews with women leaders, and a survey among women. The questionnaire and report of the survey are provided in the appendices attached at the end of the thesis. The chapter describes the pre-subjectivity phase, which is again subdivided into the emergence stage, which describes childhood images and narratives, the education stage, which assembles all the different events in her life, and the stage where she confronts the major event. The subjectivity phase includes the entry stage where a woman takes an emotionally rational, intuitive action in response to the event. The entanglement stage, where she seeks acceptance and approval of her previous actions. The immense stage, where she tries to convince herself of the rightness of her actions and becomes more confident. The last phase of her journey to subjectivity, titled the post-subjectivity phase, she finds the presence of others in the form of support or later as appropriation. In the accusation stage, the woman is accused of charges of infidelity, insincerity, treason, and selfish interest by society. If she moves on to the next stage, called the astuteness stage, the insights into the politics of reality and its manipulation by others uh, help her pay attention to her political position. This liberates her from her own apprehensions about self and the world and relieves her of the anxiety to be always right and good. In the retreat stage that comes next, a woman understands the nature of her fight and she withdraws to gain more strength for the last stage of this phase. In this last stage of revival and return, the woman emerges as a transformed individual who recognized her struggles and others' struggles too. She prepares herself to further struggles which can raise her self worth and value. Limbidius theory is used in this chapter to demonstrate this need for a concept of female subjectivity free from the gender stereotypes and misused binaries. It places Bediou's theory as one of the best available frameworks to discern the nature and patterns of female subjectivity, because this theory liberates subjectivity from the concept of gender itself. To comprehend the nature of subjectivity regarding the category of women, we need to look back at the radical conception of the subjectivity as not a preconditioned structure. The concept of subjectivity is open and fluid, not static and fixed or passive. This justifies the term woman becoming a subject. It is a process which consists of certain features which had to make it intelligible to anyone who is interested in female subjectivity. The first feature of this female subjectivity is that it is inseparable from the body. Secondly, such a theory distrusts androcentric propositions of gender and language. Um, it rejects discrimination of all sorts: caste, class, color, religion, ethnicity, ability, status, etc. Female subjectivity here also rejects power and its naturalized hierarchies. It distinguishes between the category of women and the concept of the subject. This theory is concerned about all categories of identity politics and hence egalitarian in its perception of the world. A respect for multiplicities and differences is innate in the conception of this female subject, and it treats these multiplicities as internal to it. Such a theory of female subject is very much political, and subject is materialistic rather than idealistic or metaphysical. Hence, the subject is basically what it does, and hence the knowledge of positionality is a feature of the female subject here. The female subjectivity allows scope for subjects to define themselves and the world around them in their own terms. Above all this, a female subjectivity perceives subjectivity as a process of continuous and infinite becoming, and this becoming is resistance oriented or rather revolutionary in its constitution. Also, a theory of female becoming needs to be humanitarian and inclusive in its worldview. LNBTU's theory of the subject is assimilated into female subjectivity because it meets most of these requirements of a structural for a structural framework for a central comprehensive theory for a central theory of feminisms or womanisms. So that's the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Aparna. That was quite substantial. The other examiner besides myself of the season is Dr. Kunyamat KK. from the Kannur University. I'll just quickly go through I will not read the whole report. I'll just quickly go through the report and then raise the questions. This is what Kunyama says. The opening chapter, titled Introduction, places Badiou's conception of subjectivity as fidelity to truth in the proper perspective. This chapter convincingly establishes the scope, relevance, and significance by explaining how the study is only concerned with the inquiry of how Badiou's theory of subjectivity intervenes in women's perception of the subject and how it helps interpret female subjectivity in a manner that is not focused on power, gender, and situatedness, but on positionality and eventual truth. I think that's why you have chosen Badiou, because generally female subjectivity is seen in terms of power, gender, and situatedness, but Badiou looks at it through positionality and eventual truth. It does this by highlighting how Badiou's theory of subjectivity links events, subjects to events, and material responses of individuals to events. And now let's come to the regarding the second chapter. He has said the second chapter. I think as she has already mentioned, it's titled as "Tracing Conventions: A Focus on the Subject in Male Theoretical Formulations." And in this chapter, Kunyamat says, except for a few instances where some ideas discussed earlier in the chapter are repeated, this it makes for a compelling reading. This chapter provides clear and concise view of the aims, objectives, relevance, and significance of the study. The review of literature is quite adequate and cogently integrated into the central argument of the thesis. And then regarding the second and the third chapter, he comments that the second and the third chapters have successfully placed the research problem in proper perspective within the existing debates on the question of eventual reconstruction of female subjectivity. Now it is in the fourth chapter, Being, Belonging and Becoming, the emerging Bedouin subject in Kingston's The Woman Warrior, that he has made some critical comments. I'll just read out that part. In this fourth chapter, he says, one serious omission in this chapter, that is the fourth chapter, and probably in the entire thesis, is that the criteria for the selection of this memoir by the Chinese American writer for analysis are not properly explained. The chapter contains no reference whatsoever to any article on or reviews of the memoir or its author. The researcher has left no clue as to the rationale behind the selection of this particular genre, except that there are many female characters in this memoir. And then he concludes this comment by stating this lacuna may be addressed at the time of considering publication. Now, the fifth chapter, which is titled as Real Life Resistance as a Site of Event and Subjectivization, a case study of Pembulai Urumai and similar struggles in Kerala, he says convincingly demonstrates how, unlike most other theories of subjectivity, Badiou's notion of subject attempts to go beyond gender differences by exceeding thoughts on bodies and languages in representing humans. This chapter provides adequate focus on the social and political dimensions of women's subjectivity. And then he comments, this chapter would have been greatly enriched if the researcher had tried to explore the profound implications of Badiou's theorization of the site in Logics of Worlds. Badiou's notion of the site, a crucial concept developed in Book 5 of Logics of Worlds, helps explain how worlds are radically transformed through subversive encounters. It is to be noted that in Badiou's thinking, it is through sites that change is affected in a world. This aspect is slurred over in the thesis, which is slurred over in the thesis, would have been given a more sustained focus. This is the critical remark that he makes. This may also be taken into account while publishing the dissertation. And then the sixth chapter, he makes a statement that appendices to the text of the thesis are very useful as resources for future researchers. And then he makes an important comment What is really unique about this research is the striking way in which the study addresses the intersection of philosophy and literature. Badiou's philosophy of the complex philosophy of the subject is used as a theoretical framework for the reading of a Chinese novel and the eventual eruption of a woman's rising in Kerala, thereby opening a new terrain of inquiry and establishing new lines of argument about the works of male and female writers and theorists on women's becoming in philosophy. This thesis eloquently testifies to the research scholars' keen interest in the topic and her extensive reading in the domain. And she is particularly strong in her discussion of the theoretical premises on which the study is based and of the application of the conceptual categories of Badua to memoir and the uprising. All the important writers and commentators on female subjectivity are directly or indirectly drawn on the thesis. As pointed out earlier, again and again he comes to this point, the only glaring inadequacy in the literature review is the near total absence of material on either Kingston's context as a writer or of any review of existing literature on the memoir selected for this study. Then he's all for the documentation. He congratulates the research scholar for her documentation. The MLA style of documentation that the researcher has followed is almost perfect, except for a few errors in the titles of books. Meticulous care is taken to carry in-text citations in an appropriate manner. The work cited at the end of the thesis gives details of all the work cited in the thesis. The only exception being Badiou's Manifesto for Philosophy, which would also serve as a reading list for anyone pursuing research on the topic under study. It is evident that the thesis is thoughtfully written. Apart from a few instances of concord errors and some minor typos, writing is sharply distinguished by clarity and felicity of expression. It may be noted that the critical comments do not detract from my extremely positive evaluation of the thesis. So he says whatever comments he makes does not detract from his extremely positive evaluation of the thesis. Looking at the thesis in its entirety and the light of the above observations on the merits of the thesis, I recommend the research study entitled Woman Becoming a Subject, an inquiry on selected text based on conceptual categories of Alan Barrow, submitted by Aparna P. for the award of the Doctor of Philosophy. Now let me come to my um,
I, excuse me, the audience has to interact with.
yeah. I'll just raise some questions which Aparna has to answer, and then I think we can leave the floor to the audience. Some of the questions.
Okay.
Is it necessary to have a homogeneous feminist theory for women? There are women coming from different regions, races, and cultures. One theory cannot fit all. In keeping with the postmodern trend, isn't it better to have multiple feminisms to give into polyphony? That is one question. Would you prefer to answer that,
Yes,
Aparna?
I wish to answer that first and then move on to the next, if
Yeah,
you don't
okay.
mind.
Yeah. So,
Um,
what do you answer?
yes, ma'am. As you said, it is almost impossible to have a, homogeneous a feminist theory for women. Uh, Postmodern feminism focuses on, especially feminism focuses on differences and polyphony. Yet there are many theorists like Naomi Zak and Zeila Ben Habib who talk about the need for a theory of political subjectivity which can consolidate the autonomy of the feminisms for a greater collective life. So a central feminist theory, not as you said, a comprehensive, homogeneous feminist theory is impossible. So instead of that, a central feminist theory is useful in emphasizing this plurality and the specificity of female experiences, especially in academic discourses. It can help women. It can also help women in recognizing a general nature of their physical uh, moral and psychological struggles. Theoretical and academic focus on a central female subjectivity theory will help them to understand different perspectives in a better way, I hope. These studies can also inform the women on the different kinds of social stereotyping on a global level. So, this thesis does not attempt to impose a universal pattern on the plurality of feminism, but it is an attempt to find out an alternative way of looking at the question of the female subject. The concept of subjectivity discussed here is compatible with intersectionality and the plurality of feminisms. So, as you said, general theory is always impossible.
Yeah, another question as well.
Excuse me, Nisha, can you just
Yeah.
a minute? I just wanted to interrupt. It's not a question, but Sharif, if you could just ask Mr. Srikumar to stop presenting, it would be a big help. It is very distracting, and his personal details are appearing on the screen. So please tell him if Mr. Srikumar.
Mr. Srikumar,
So many things are coming up. Even his personal messages are coming on the screen. Maybe he's
okay,
not aware.
can you please stop presenting? Mr. Srikumar,
I think he's
hello,
not aware of the fact.
Yeah, that's it. So it can be very
He's not aware of
hello,
the fact.
many
hello,
messages are coming on the screen. So he doesn't
hello,
know that. Yeah.
hello.
Yeah, I think now he understood. Now he has stopped.
It stopped coming. It has stopped
Yeah,
coming.
now it has stopped coming. Yeah, okay. Yes, yes, please go. I'm sorry, but I thought we shouldn't embarrass him. That's why I asked.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
okay.
saw the comment and I didn't understand what's happening.
No, many things were coming. Many of the personal messages were coming. So that's why I was immediately called.
Okay.
Like it had stopped in between, so I thought it had stopped for
No,
all
no.
suddenly
Yeah.
started reappearing again. It's okay.
No, private
Thank
messages
you,
were
Srikumar.
coming. Okay, okay.
Sorry for that.
Can I come to the second question, Aparna?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
Yes,
please,
sure.
please.
Yeah, let me come to the second question. The second question that I've asked is this: of the well-known American critic Elaine Showalter had taken a stand for gynocriticism and had said that both imitation and protest are dependent on male text, and therefore one can never build a female tradition of writing. The feminist critics depend on male theorists, and it entails tutelage under them for a long period in order to apply their theories to female texts. He also states that feminist critics naturalize women's victimization and stereotyping. Therefore, we need female theorists for female tradition. What is your take on this? She says we need female theorists for female tradition. She talks about building a female tradition, but you seem to be going, instead of building a female tradition, you seem to be going for the male critic again. Now, so what is your take on this?
Um, Yes, ma'am. You're absolutely right there. The problem with imitating or resisting male text is that the inherent significance given to gender binaries results in normalizing oppression again. Many attempts were made in feminism to focus on a theoretical perspective on women, which does not marginalize or victimize them based on gender. Uh, Shulamit Firestone even goes to the extent of imagining a biological revolution which results in an androgynous society. Uh, in this thesis, actually, an attempt is made to um, displace gender from feminist discourses and instead to shift the focus from gender to subjectivity actually. So Ellen Bedou's theory of the subject is appropriated here to suit the purpose of female theoretical discourses. It was chosen due to its inherent revolutionary potential, because unlike other male theorists, he does not uh, base his concept of subjectivity on gender. Uh, and he as there is a problem for Kristeva and Siksu with the main language itself. So the same problem can be seen in Vidyu also. He distrusts this language, and he often uses a mathematical language, which when I read most of his works, it was very difficult for me to understand his language. It was not
What do you
a
mean by mathematical language? What do you mean by mathematical language?
Ma'am, he uses set theory and mathematical concepts to explain his philosophy. Without a solid background in mathematics, it is difficult to even read Badiou. The theory of the subject is one text which I found comparatively easier to read, because there are very few very few use of that language.
And then the third, okay, okay. Have you finished? Okay.
No,
Then we come to the third. No, you have not finished. Okay, then continue.
no, ma'am. Actually, Bediou is used here. Not the central focus is not given to Bediou, because already Butler and other theorists have talked about subjectivity and such a theory of subjectivity, female subjectivity. This thesis is only an attempt to assimilate Bediou's subjectivity theory into various previous feminist thoughts, like Mary Daly's ethics of personhood, Sissu's écriture feminine, Linda Alcough's positionality, Rosie Braidotti's nomadic theory, Donna Haraway's cyborg, and Bell Hooks' idea of erotica of being, and many other such feminist epistemological and ontological researches. So the subject is here social, academic, and political necessity. Only because of that reason, I tried to assimilate his theory into this. I hope that.
Yeah, okay. And one last question. I have a slight objection about the sampling regarding the Munar agitation. You have mentioned that 100 questionnaires were distributed and you got back only 72 responded. And my contention is that 72 is too small a sample to base one's conclusion. There are thousands of workers there, isn't it? So, female workers. So, how can you isn't 72 too small a sample to base one's conclusions? That is one fact that what is the answer to that?
72 is, ma'am, I understand that there are limitations in the sampling. No theoretical formulation can be based on this sampling. Actually, when we went to Munnar, the workers were not allowed to interact with outsiders. So it was very difficult for us to go there and talk to the workers in the tea estates at all. Only very few people, just because we knew a mutual friend of theirs, were able to talk to us. The others couldn't. And then we did not actually want to create a problem there. So that's why we couldn't. There is more of a surveillance culture after the strike. Gaumati is working in a different place now, so it was okay for us to go and talk to her there. And many of the other workers, they were not there during the time of the strike. Many people were brought from other states to work there. So only this was possible at that moment. And I think I would like to do a more extensive research based on more questionnaires distributed to women, maybe throughout the country uh, in the future. I would
I
like to
think that would be
continue this
too
research.
that would be too ambitious, I think. No, because another thing is, see, most of these women are uneducated. So how did they manage to answer these questions? Majority of them
Uh,
are uneducated, isn't it? So how was it possible for them to answer these questions?
Most of these questionnaires were not distributed among workers. They were distributed among other ordinary housewives, and it includes other people as well in the locality, women in the locality. They were only able to, the workers were only able to talk to us. They could not even read Malayalam. Most of them came
No,
from,
no, no. No, so how can the ordinary housewives talk about the experience of the workers in the tea estate?
no, the survey is on other women experiences as well. For the sixth chapter, I needed more data about the process of female subjectivity in the lives of people other than workers as well. So I tried to collect a sample data from the women who are present in other localities who were doing other jobs as well.
Okay. And then in the interview with Gomati Augustine, that's her name, isn't it?
Yes,
I found out that she was very disappointed, and then she was alienated after the successful rebellion. After the amount was increased, she was actually alienated, and she had to leave the place, I think, isn't it?
yes, ma'am.
So how success, as far as her case is concerned, it's not a success, isn't it? Only thing that it brought in a lot of publicity for her. She was her children were penalized. Her boys were often followed by the police, etc. and all that. So she's living independently now, I think, because of that. So
Uh,
what do you have to say to that?
One thing she told me was very interesting, ma'am, that I cannot go back to my previous life after this protest, she said, because she knew that there are injustices everywhere. And she told us that the movement was not at all a success because they raised the wages. It was a very meager amount. And in the
Hmm.
next year, they might reduce it again. Most of the decisions reached in the compromise talk were just temporary adjustments between trade unions. So Gomati was not even allowed to enter inside the discussion room. Instead, somebody else went, and she came to know about the facts, the result of the discussion only after a long time. And she said it's just again another manipulation by the management. But she says
Yes.
she is a member. She is a block panchayat member now, and she says she once she understood what the political dimension of her life is. She says I cannot go back to the old self, to the uneducated um, uh, tea estate worker that I was in the beginning. It's very difficult for me. Nobody is there for me now, but still I want to go on in this new direction. And she said many things happened, like many men stopped beating their wives in the tea estates. And the problem which they faced was this was not just one issue,
Domestic
which
violence. Domestic violence.
yes,
Domestic
yes,
violence.
wages was not just one issue there in their strike. They did not include men in their strikes because there was this kind of domestic violence happening inside their homes, and they had problems with the trade unions. They always had their own agenda. So there were many issues in the movement, but they were actually marginalized or sidelined by the media and government and the management. So she says certain things, several things happened in the lives of all these women who participated in the struggle. So she says that is the success of the struggle. I changed, and many of the women who participated in the movement changed from their previous selves to new selves, which is what I consider as success. She said.
Yeah. You mentioned that the focus of the text is on the subjectivity of Gomati Augustine, isn't it?
Yes,
One
ma'am.
of the leaders of the Pambulai Orumai. I think
Yes.
we can leave the floor open to the other questions from the audience. Sharif Mash, why don't we have more questions from the audience? The floor is open for the audience. You can ask questions to Aparna. Any questions?
Yeah, it's audience time. Yes.
Hmm? Any questions from the audience? Can we have at least one or two questions, please? Any comments? It need not be
Yes,
questions, any comments.
yeah, Aparna is curious to know about
Ma'am, it's not clear.
this
What are you
thing.
trying to
So
say?
please,
Aparna?
those from the audience, please respond first. Know what the audience has to say. After presenting, she is curious to know what the audience has to say. Are you, are you hearing me now? Are you able to hear me?
Yeah,
Yes,
it's
yes,
clear
ma'am.
now. Janaki, any questions?
No, Nisha, I had already, when she made her pre-submission, I had some doubts
Okay.
and I've clarified them. So I don't have any
Okay.
questions right now. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, just one small thing. About the Pempule Urume, the size of the sample was mentioned. 72 out of how many? 1,000 plus.
100 questionnaires. No, she says that 100 questionnaires were distributed
100 of
and
them
she
were.
got back only 72. And her conclusion is based on these 72 questionnaires that she got back.
But I
So,
wondered, normally in surveys, samples are of course limited like this. Only question is whether they are representative. Okay, if you have 72 uh, people interacting with you, do they represent the mass? Okay, 1,000 plus, whatever number you have. So if
I'm sure there must be more than 2,000 people working those estates
2,000,
in a
whatever
single.
number, 1,000 or 2,000.
Yeah.
So if the
Yeah.
samples are representative, I think everywhere that is how it's done. When, for example, one of my candidates, one of my research scholars conducted a survey. There also the samples were limited. Out of, let us say, 24,000 teachers,
Mm.
the samples numbered, if I remember right, less than 600. So the question came up there also, whether they were representative.
No, 600 is quite a good sampling, sir. 600 is
But
quite a good
out
sampling.
of
72 is too little.
24,000, it's a
Uh,
big number.
no, that is only humanly possible. You can't take more
Yeah,
than
yeah, yeah.
600, no?
That's in Aparna's case
That
also. I
is
was
okay.
wondering if it has. I haven't read the full thesis, so I can't say whether she has
Mm.
mentioned that these samples are representative. I don't know. I'm not aware of what happened. If they are representative, I think there's no problem.
Huh. No, this is just a question because, yeah. Now, Aparna, what do you have to say to that?
Ma'am, it's actually not much responses from other TSAs were collected. So I don't think that is sufficient for me to reach a conclusion. So I took, I talked to many of the people in the TSAs. That's how I, made a conclusion actually, not based on these surveys, because I knew about the limitation of these surveys. They may not be representative. Like I said, most of the workers there, they were transferred to other places. They quit their jobs, and they brought in many other workers from other states after this protest. So many things happened after the movement. So may not be representative.
Okay.
Just wondered, sir.
Any other questions?
Ma'am, am I audible? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah. Aparna ma'am, you have mentioned, with reference to Pembala, right? You have mentioned that despite all other differences like gender, class, caste, one can be a subject or subjectivity formation despite all such differences. I think with reference to Pembala, such a reference is there. But I think at the same time, subjectivity or such formation is as part of gender, class, caste, such differences as well. Is it out of as despite such differences, or do such differences help us to form subject? I think question is clear.
Yes, the question is clear. Actually, his theory does not disregard gender or gender experiences. It does not deny gender. Uh, this theory tries to endeavors, the notion of subjectivity tries to liberate subjects from the restrictive forces of gender, power, time, and space. Um, which construct the stereotypical ideas about gender, body, and language also. So here, what is possible is, what I have attempted is to displace gender from the center of feminist discourses and place subjectivity there, so that it is more of a neutral way of representing women, based on what kind of eventual truths they reach in their lives, how they show fidelity to the truths in their lives. That is how I approach the whole thing of subjectivity, female subjectivity. So gender is not the presence of gender is not denied at all. Gender is one major fact in their oppression, so it is also taken into consideration. I hope the answer is satisfactory.
Yeah, it's clear. Okay, thank you.
Aparna, this is Narayanan here.
Sir.
Just a little question. I was just listening to your presentation as well as following this discussion here, and your suggestion that you're trying to displace gender from the center of feminist discourse and try to place subjectivity there. In a sense, it does fly in the face of Butlerian problematic, in the sense that is there a subject that is prior to gender, a kind of a core essential subject, which is not structured by the paradigms of gender or the exclusions of gender, or especially when it comes to the female, the questions of exclusion that is part of the otherness that is part of what one would call a masculine world. So, is there a subject? Are you suggesting that there is an essential subject outside of the structure of gender itself? I'm asking this question because I just want a clarification. Are you trying to suggest that Badiou is effectively contradicting Butler by suggesting that there could be a subject that is probably not implicated within the paradigms of gender? Am I?
Yes, sir. Actually, he is not contradicting Butler, I think. Even Butler is talking about a subjectivity, but which is not, Badiou did not tell us about gender at all, gender identities at all. He's only talking about a subject in terms of an individual or a body itself as its response to the eventual truth of life. Or the truths in the events. This theory, this female subjectivity theory that is mentioned in this thesis is only a framework to understand female subjectivity from a different perspective. So he is not actually contradicting Butler. He actually, the theory of subject proposed by Ellen Badiou is inclusive of the plurality of feminisms and also the intersectionality. As you said, all those experiences, the subjectivity itself is formed through the experiences of gender and other marginal identities. In the case of Kingston itself, in her memoir, she is talking about how her identity as a female, as a lower class person, as a Chinese American immigrant, shaped her thoughts. And after a particular point in time, she recognized that she is not all these separate identities, but she is what she becomes after recognizing the political and social context of these identities. In a way, it's a kind of the becoming is actually transcending the being. As you said, gender, sexuality, our ability, status, everything are part of our being. And becoming here is symbolized as something which transcends the political and social dimension of this being. As I said, it's a different framework.
Okay, I'm still a little, no, I don't want you to answer, but I'm still a little uncomfortable, even when you say that gender is a part of being and becoming is something that transcends. I'm not very sure whether within I'm looking at it from a Butlerian problematic or a Butlerian theorization, and I'm still unsure whether gender can be seen as something that is being in an ontological sense, precisely because then you are assuming a fixity. You're assuming a stability to that, which is exactly what Butler seeks to actually reject or rebut. And in fact, seeing gender is not something that follows the body and sex, but something which structures both the body as well as sex. Gender as the arch or the primary discourse through which both the body as well as sex is determined. So I'm still not fully sure, but I leave that question to you, whether maybe not Badiou, but maybe whether your interpretation of I understand, of course, that Badiou is not actually talking directly about gender, but in terms of the formation of subjectivity. But your interpretation, does it, or your reading, does it imply some kind of an essential subject, an essential subjectivity, which may be deconstructed in Butlerian terms? I leave that question, not for you to answer, but I leave that question for you to mull about. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I think somewhere you have suggested that Badiou's subject is equipped with knowledge and truth and not with agency and power. I think, like Augustine, Gomati Augustine, he does not get any agency or power, but it is self knowledge, I think, isn't it? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Gomati Augustine does not get any agency, nor does she have a power. But then there is this self knowledge and truth. It is coming out of darkness and then being aware. So Badiou's subject is equipped with knowledge and truth, but not with agency and power. And I
Yes.
think maybe that's why she feels that Badiou's subject can better represent marginalized communities rather than privileged and or oppressing classes. I think that's what I understood.
Yes, ma'am.
Because the Bedouin subject is not concerned with. See, generally, the female subjectivity is concerned with agency. What is the agency? What is the agency, and what is the power that the female subject gets after a certain event? But she acknowledges the Bedouin subject is not concerned with agency nor with power, but with self knowledge and truth. And that is a little bit idealistic, but again, that is what she prefers to go with. I think idealism, not with the real. And I think somewhere in the chapter 6, she has pointed the binary between the idealist and the materialist. Most of the women thinkers focus on inverted realities, which makes the life of the women difficult. And the researchers state that most of the female theories of subjectivity imagine women as a collective identity in spite of their differences. Any other questions? Any other questions from the audience, from the side of the audience? Sharif sir, shall we wind up then? If there are no more questions, can we wind up the session?
Sure. Sure. I think if there are no more questions, we
Okay.
can wind up. Probably Aparna can respond to the
Yeah.
session. And then, but before that, you have to give your verdict. Sorry.
Yeah. Keeping in mind the overall merit of the thesis, I am happy to recommend Aparna B for the award of PhD degree. Congratulations, Aparna. I think it will be kept in the form it will be kept in the syndicate, and then you will officially become a doctor, Dr. Aparna B. Congratulations, Aparna.
Thank you, ma'am.
For your
Thank you very
successful
much.
defense of your. Over to you,
Aparna,
Aparna, or to
if you,
is it
Aparna, if you
Pratibha
want to
ma'am?
say thanks, yeah. Yeah, I was trying to tell Aparna, if she wants to say anything now, she can proceed with that, and then I will continue with
Aparna.
the vote of thanks.
Okay. Okay, ma'am. I would like to thank everybody who was part of this journey. My family, my colleagues in the department, and the members of the Department of English at Calcutta University, and other friends and people who know me, everybody. I thank everybody, and especially now I thank Nisha ma'am for being here and for you know for this wonderful moment. And I thank Pratibha ma'am also because she I hope I did not made her uncomfortable with all my questions and everything during a period where she was going through pain and suffering. And I value her support and love greatly. And I would like to use this occasion to thank her and the HOD of the Department of English and all the other members of the department, and my students who are also present here, and my other teachers Geeta ma'am and Sangeeta ma'am especially, and many of the people were ready to read my thesis, and they responded, and accordingly I could make changes. So I thank everybody. Thank you, everybody.
So now it's my turn, I think. Yeah? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Very
All
much.
right.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
yeah, I can go ahead, right? There's a saying that no duty is more urgent than that of expressing thanks, and that saying thank you to those who matter is more than good manners, it is good spirituality. So, on that note, let me begin my word of thanks. Hi to everyone here. So, we all had just witnessed Aparna, a research scholar under my supervision, reached the finishing point of her doctoral journey successfully. Of course, like most of the researchers before Aparna and maybe after too, Aparna too had a long and tough journey, and she had what you can call as many doubting moments in between too. But never did she let the stumble on the road be the end of her journey, and never ever gave up. So kudos to her for that. And um, another thing is that contrast, it's time for me to say contrast to Aparna for your success. Congrats Aparna for success. And um, your effort, your sincere effort deserves the success. You still have way to go. That's what I feel. Keep going. All the best for your future too. And I'm proud of you. You did it. That was one feel good defense that you have just made. And that doesn't, but listen, Aparna, that doesn't mean that it's time for you to adhere to Badyo. It's not time to be adhere to Badyo now. You still have to carry on with further research on areas which people are not really very familiar with, and make people aware of such theoreticians and philosophers and their input into literature. So that's it, Aparna. So once again, congrats to you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So things are, yeah. So on this occasion, we have Dr. Nisha Venugopal with us as examiner. We appreciate you for being an important part of academic work here, all our academic work here in this department. Also, thank you for saying the candidate about. You have always been kind and graceful on such occasions like this. Yes, truly, one kind word can change someone's entire day. Thanks a lot, Nisha,
Thank you.
for being what
Thank
you
you.
are. And I also, and I also would like to put on gratitude to Professor Kunya, the second evaluator of this thesis from Kannur University. Thank you, Kunya Ahmed, for your insightful and positive report that you have given. Thanks a lot. And my thanks to the department is always there, and that goes without saying. Thank you, Sharif. Thank you, Narayanan, Janaki, Umar Tasneem, and all the young faculties of the department. And now it's the turn of the audience. Many of you have made a huge effort to be here with us today. On behalf of all in the department, let me say, we are deeply appreciative of you all sharing your time, your precious time with us. My thanks to all those, there were only a few, but thanks to all those who enriched the session with valid interaction and inputs. Thank you all. Once again, I think it is time for me to wind up the session by saying that thank you all for your cordial cooperation. Have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So we are winding up. Nisha, just to remind you of those
Sharif?
documents.
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
do that. Yeah, everything is ready. I'll just take I'll scan it and I'll send it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Can we call it a day, Sharif?
Yeah, we're calling it a
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
Sharif
Come
is
back.
around?
Yes,
I'm around.
he's here.
Yes. We're calling it a day. Yes.
Sharif, are
Okay,
you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
hear you. Hello. I can hear you. No, probably you can see me.
I think we should wait for him to
I'm here.
close the
I'm here.
session
I'm here.
formally.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you see me? Hello.
Maybe
Hello,
she
Pratibha?
can't receive.
Can you see me?
Sharif is not around.
Yes. He's here.
Okay. I'm here. Very much here.
She is waiting for you to
Sharif?
make a formal declaration.
Okay.
Sharif,
I'm making a formal declaration. We are coming to the end of the session. We are winding up. So, as Pratibha did, I also thank everybody involved. Thank you. We're winding up.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Nisha, I think Sharif is
Yeah, I'm here.
somehow otherwise engaged. So, in
No,
his
he's here.
absence,
He's here.
let us close the session hereby. Okay? Is that okay with
Yeah,
you?
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah?
But Sharifat is here. He just made a
Okay.
statement.
So he's not
Okay.
found. He's seen here. His presence is there, but I think he's otherwise occupied. Yeah, he's
No,
coming
he's
back,
here.
I think.
He's here. Okay, thank you, everybody.